What folklore creature do you think really exists? I don't think it's necessarily likely per se, but my family are Irish, and they hardcore believe in the fair folk, or the East She. They're not exactly fairies, they're different, meaner. You don't fuck with them basically, and if something's going horribly wrong in your life, it's probably because you fucked with them, or you made them angry. And you have to be careful how you talk about them too. Kind of like with Skinwalkers, you don't name them. You just call them the fair folk or the folk. They mostly hang out and try to get you to owe them a favor. You don't take anything from the folk or you owe them one, and you don't want to be in that position. There's lots of different types that do lots of different things though. I don't want to come off as that weirdo who believes in what is essentially fairies, but I grew up with the stories, and I have a healthy level of skepticism about this. I'm not saying they're real, but I'm also not about to step into a fairy circle anytime soon, especially not at dusk. Not that I think it's likely, but I love the Mokele-mbembe legend. Supposedly some sort of dinosaur-like creature living in the swamps in Cameroon or thereabouts. Its name means the one who stops the flow of rivers. Legend has it that this enormous beast has a long neck and is bigger than an elephant. It supposedly walks along the riverbeds and swamplands, mostly submerged, and has been thought to kill large predators like crocodiles, but then not eat them. There's a story about a small village that killed one of these creatures and ate it, and a short time later, everyone who had eaten its flesh either became sick or died. The main reason it's so compelling is that the jungle and swamplands where it supposedly lives are so dense and impassable for people that it could have conceivably lived in the relatively unchanged climate for thousands upon thousands of years, and humans would have never encountered it, or even been able to venture into its habitat with any reasonable effort. I am Ojibwe. When people in the past faced starving times due to crop failure or drought or tribal warfare, etc., people who had no other choice would eat the dead out of absolute desperation. People would go mad from starvation before they finally did this. As you can imagine, it was deeply shameful for survivors. After the starving time, no one in the community wanted to discuss it, what they had to do to survive. For our people, the Windigo legend originated with these experiences. The Windigo was a euphemism, an actualization of the survivor's emotions during and after the starving time, wherein the urge to eat became all-consuming of a person's spirit. That the maddening hunger possessed them to such an extent that it would cause them to eat the community's dead. Instead of discussing their actual feelings about the cannibalism that was caused by starvation, the story of the Windigo began. It continued to shape and retelling for centuries and centuries since time immemorial between different Ojibwe communities. So picture the Windigo, a huge, towering spirit that walked the bush. Its power was so great that it knocked down trees as it moved. It came to life every winter, especially after a drought, when the people could not store enough food in spring, summer, and fall for winter. When the community's crops had failed, when the forest had been dry as tinder and no berries and roots could grow, when the fishing had been poor because the fish were not running in the streams, when the hunting was poor because animals starved, because animal mothers could not eat enough and they didn't produce enough milk for their babies. Because animal mothers could not eat enough and they did not produce milk for their babies. The babies died and the mothers starved. When even the beavers of the land left because the streams dried up and the birch trees withered. That was when the Windigo came to the land to torment the people. It followed them through the bush as they searched for food until they could go no further. The Windigo then ran down the people, possessed the people, made them mad with hunger and lust for food of any kind, made them so evil and mad that they would eat the dead, the elders, the children, and if the Windigo entered you, you also became a Windigo. You could then possess others to become eaters of the dead as well. A lot of folklore creatures are just regular creatures in disguise, i.e., the giant squid equals the kraken, manatees mistaken for merpeople, dinosaur bones thought to be dragons, etc. Vampires and werewolves are based on real medical conditions or historical figures. That said, I have no doubt that giant sea creatures of any kind could exist in the depths of the ocean. I can't speak seriously for any other commonly known cryptid or mythical creature, but people seriously underestimate how much land is unsettled, unexplored, or virtually unknown to us as well. There are plenty of places for some other previously undiscovered species to be hidden away, even if only in small numbers. That might not count as a folklore creature for the purposes of this question, but it's worth keeping in mind. On a more, I don't hardcore believe it, but I want it to be true sort of level, ghosts and elves/fairies. I feel like both suggest the existence of other realms, if that's the right word to describe it, and would greatly shake up the way we, as a society, view the world today. I'd like to think that a lot of things are real, but having looked into a lot of them, the more research I've done, the harder it is to take most of it seriously. There's way too much personal bias, wishful thinking, and flat-out dishonesty that goes into a lot of the research done. That said, one thing, or rather two things, that always stuck out to me were the basilisk and the Mongolian death worm. The death worm is a legless creature that lives in sandy deserts, has some sort of crest or antenna, and can apparently electrocute people. The basilisk is another legless creature that lives in sandy deserts, had a crest on its head, and was so venomous that if a man on a horse speared one, the venom would travel up the spear and kill both him and his horse. Considering how good of a conductor sand is, and that multiple kinds of fish can generate electricity, it seems kind of plausible that some other animal might exist that has that kind of defense mechanism. In ancient Greek times, people weren't all that familiar with electricity, and nobody had ever heard of an electric eel. So if somebody just dropped dead after spearing a weird, snaky-looking animal, an electric shock probably wouldn't have been the first explanation they thought of. There's a local legend in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which involves a mysterious and supposedly deadly sort of otherworldly creature. Some versions claim that it's a man-like shapeshifter, capable of blending in with the shadows as it stalks through the desert. Others describe the beast as being curiously canine in nature, albeit with 2 long limbs, black claws, and eyes that seem to burn like pinprick embers in the darkness. One thing that remains the same through every retelling, though, is the high and eerie keening noise it's said to make when it hunts down its prey. One evening when I was about 11 years old, I heard it. I had been lying in bed, reading beneath my covers with a flashlight, when a mournful howl pierced the air from somewhere across the moonlit sands. My first thought was that it had been a coyote, but as the sound echoed through the night for a second time, I felt a shiver of panic flash up my spine, and a deep weight of dread coalesce in my chest. That evil wail was not the call of anything I had ever encountered, nor of something that should have even existed in the waking world. It was the cry of a nightmare incarnate, and no amount of reason or rationality could shake me of that notion. Now, at around the same time as this story, I've been doing my best to foster a reputation for being an independent and unflappable badass. That goal went swiftly out the window as the screeches seemed to draw ever closer, and I quickly ran from my room to seek the protection of my parents. Upon reaching their door, though, I was presented with an even more terrifying discovery. The howls were coming from inside the house, along with a lot of heavy breathing and the occasional whisper. I couldn't look my mother in the eye for a whole week. Shadow people. I believe because I saw one. When I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. It was a pretty old building in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, and according to his dad, it used to be owned by Al Capone, but I'm not sure how true that was. We had an apartment on the top floor that they let us use to just hang out, and it allowed us easy access to the roof so we could go smoke cigarettes. One night, we were about to go up, but I had to pee, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went up the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. We had those old flip phones without lights, so you only had the light from the screen to help navigate the cluttered mess that was up there. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. Now, this wasn't like the shadow of something moving with the light of my phone. This shadow felt like a person. I followed the direction it went, thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times before heading to the other side of the attic, and that's when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out, and I told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there. I hate it, but I do think skinwalkers could exist. We're right up against native land and a huge national forest, and there are things here that you just don't bring up. My husband and I were coming back from a trip to the lake with our toddler asleep in his car seat at about 10 p.m. We had planned on camping out, but pregnant me got way too hot and needed some air conditioning. We're smack dab in the center of the forest on this typically gorgeous road that never has traffic. It's 40-odd miles either way to the nearest building, no side roads, only hiking trails. We're joking, reliving the day and how our son enjoyed his first s'mores when I screamed, "Watch out!" There was a man in blue plaid, long-sleeved button-down shirt, damn near in our lane, arms stretched out like he was a fucking scarecrow. Husband swerves in our huge fucking truck, scaring me shitless. Sorry, but fuck you, hitchhiker. If it's hit you or flipped this truck with my kid in it, you're fucked. We had been cruising pretty slow, speed limit is 75 miles per hour, and we were going about 60 because deer like to sprint across the street at random. So now we're stopped beside the road. The guy is still fucking standing there, and now we think it is a scarecrow some douche canoe put out there to scare someone because the arms are really long and he isn't moving at all. I told my husband as quick as I had a signal I'd call the park office to remove it, but I really needed to pee, so let's get to town. He agreed, turned the radio down, and was getting ready to move when a big coyote walked in front of the truck, looked at us, and went into the woods. It was pretty neat. We like wildlife, and you never see coyotes so close. But I turned to look back, and the man/scarecrow was gone. We didn't say another word until we got home. Fuck that. In Yucatan, Mexico, there are these gnomish spirits the Mayan people call aluches. They look like kid-sized adults, but in a weird way. People do all kinds of rituals to be at peace with them because they're annoying as fuck if you piss them off. Crops won't grow, things will go missing in your house. Straight up, they will be messing with you all the time. In rural areas especially, they believe 100% in them and openly talk about the rituals and the spooky stories surrounding them. 10 out of 10 wouldn't mess with an alush. Also, there is a local legend about a gigantic black dog with red or yellow eyes, depending on the damn dog's mood apparently, that has been seen on the road to rural areas, and it seems like that angry demon dog is there to kill you or scare you enough to have an accident. Like it's the size of a small pony or something, but stares right into your soul. Many people I know swear they've seen it and never drove faster in their lives. Yucatan Peninsula has some really interesting stories. The Windigo. That shit is real, yo. There's recollections of it from multiple tribes in complete isolation from each other. Tribes that had never even began to make contact with each other both retell the story of this gnarly beast. I have friends who grew up in rural Kentucky near the forests. As a child, they were forbidden to be near the trees at night. During the day, they could only go deep enough to see their house still. For the longest time, they had no idea why, but it was the parents' #1 rule above all rules. They also said, if you hear or see anything strange, put your head between your knees until it's gone. They found out later it was because of the Windigo folklore. Apparently, a lot of people have gone missing in those woods without a trace, not far from civilization and definitely within cell range too. But apparently, the creature has something to do with greed and gluttony, so they don't attack the pure of heart, children. AKA, tuck your head and stay still till it's gone. I even have a personal friend who's had a run-in and miraculously survived. He's only told a small handful of people the story, and it shook him to his bones. He only told me because he knew I'd actually listen and wouldn't write him off as crazy. To this day, he still refuses to enter wooded areas. Some kind of chupacabra existed. It might have been a kind of dog, but very tall for a quadrupedal animal. My dad had a biography of this dude from the early 80s who conducted armed missions in Costa Rica privately. It was a kind of boring book with a lot of written pictures of the rainforest and the wildlife, then some minor gunfights with the coke lords of the region. Then there's an odd chapter explaining a couple nights where he slept out on the border to some farmer's field. Him and his partner basically dug a hole up on a hill near the trees and slept in it, hiding under the leaves. He woke up in the middle of the night to gunfire, and his partner was already behind him in the tree line watching the adjacent field below them. He slowly crawls into the trees to his partner to survey the situation. It was the owner of the land and his 2 sons, a couple hundred feet down a hill from them. They were chasing what looked like a horse at first, shooting rifles in the air while they chased it. After a while watching this animal, they noticed something odd about its physical appearance. The entire property had 3 to 4 foot high barbed fences around the perimeter. The animal ran up alongside it, and its head was a clear 1 to 2 feet over the top of the fence. Its fur was all messed up, it had a small head and a slender body like a greyhound. When the farmers got close enough, it jumped and cleared the fence like a deer, ran along the other side of the fence like a dog, and then finally cut into the woods. I think they all exist. I just think whoever saw them was exaggerating or misremembering or was just so scared they didn't get a good look. Me and my cousins once went out camping on a creek, way out in the woods near my parents' house. My dad, without us knowing, put a deer camera in the woods a ways off from where our tent would be. We ended up being a little out of frame, but close enough so that he could see any shenanigans we pulled. Anyway, that night I saw a monster creep through the woods. It was giant and had a long, creepy tail, big teeth, no feet. I panicked and ran a couple miles back to the house. My dad is skeptical, but tells me that he had a deer camera watching us. We go to grab the camera and watch the shots from around the time, since luckily the camera was right on that same ledge. Possum. One little possum. I was looking at a possum and convinced myself as I looked at it that it was at least 5 feet tall and didn't have feet. Possum. Before starting, I must give credit to the French YouTuber Dirty Biology for what I'm about to explain. He did a video on it that I can't/don't know how to link right now since I'm on mobile. What he said is that dragons are half possible, in the sense that one of their characteristics fails, and it's not the most unrealistic sounding one. The thing that fails with a dragon is the flight, or at least if dragons were as big as they were described. The problem is that if I remember correctly, a bunch of scientists have proven that in the current condition of Earth's gravity and air pressure, a flying creature can't be any bigger than a harpy eagle. Beyond that size, the mass of the creature would be too heavy for any wings to support. But interestingly enough, fire breathing is not so impossible. Let's think about it. To create fire, we need 2 things, a combustible and something to ignite it. The combustible is relatively easy. A lot of flammable gases are already found in some actual animals of our world, such as cows, whose intestinal bacteria produces methane, which is flammable. Our dragon would just need some of this bacteria in his stomach and some kind of organ connected to his mouth to store the gas. Combustible check. Now for the lighter. Dirty Biology had come to the conclusion that a realistic solution would be something similar to fire steel. The dragon would just need a ferrocerium plate somewhere in his mouth and a little metallic thingy on his tongue. The material for both those things could be found in the dragon's diet, although it would probably take a long time for young dragons to grow it. So, in conclusion, if dragons exist, they don't fly or are way smaller than we think. Everything existed to embellishment. See, there were monsters in the wood, but they were beasts that had grown to sizes not attainable in the modern world. Lions, tigers, and bears, with imagination. Or perhaps it was lost through time. Stories of unicorns may have come from the rhinoceros Elesmotherium, a giant woolly rhino with a single massive horn that had legs built for galloping like a horse. For the sea, imagine seeing a great white come up like they do. You only see it for a flash, only you have no previous knowledge of what the fuck that thing is. Like a fisherman's tale, it was exaggerated into a giant serpent. Now, Bigfoot, that's interesting. I don't pretend to believe in those hunters doing their show, but to be fair, the Sasquatch is the only mythological creature with a scarily exact fossil record. We know there used to be lots of hominid species that we either killed, fucked, or outcompeted. It's not far-fetched to say we missed one, especially since reports of giant hairy wild men have come up in most world cultures independently. The Mothman stuff is absolutely fascinating. Roughly 13 months before the collapse of Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, on the 15th of December 1967, people began to see some really freaky stuff around that town, and not just the Mothman. This is literally where the phrase Men in Black got coined, because after the first cases, one where a group of young people saw it in an abandoned factory, an old farmer saw it in his backyard, and it possibly carried off his dog, and then a young couple in a car saw a dead dog by the side of the road, and the Mothman flying above them. All of these sightings happened within days or even hours of each other. They never met and never even had time to hear about the other sightings, and yet they all described the exact same thing. A roughly 3-meter tall humanoid figure with brown and gray skin, leathery wings, and glowing red eyes. Then there was a guy who was contacted by an alien who called himself Indrid Cold, literally by pulling him over in a UFO on the highway. Odd men dressed in black that had acted very out of place started going around town and asking people about what they have seen, because within a few months everyone had seen some of this, or at least weird lights and other things. A journalist, John Keel, came to investigate and wrote an entire book about that time where he coined the phrase. Basically, it's one of the best documented UFO/cryptid cases in history, and it's totally freaky, because he started getting messages from some of these entities that something bad is going to happen around Christmas, and it did. The other sightings of Mothman when it comes to tragedies were made up for the movie though, as far as I know, and it was really just those 13 months in Point Pleasant and the surrounding area. I believe quite a few as a Native American. I'm 10% Sioux on my dad's side and 30% Cherokee on my mom's side. One such beast that scares me as bad as the Windigo or Skinwalker is the werewolf. I told this story to a few friends online. Most run away when I tell them about it. Others grab a bag of snacks and sit down to hear my tale. If you're happy about going into the woods, please don't read what I'm about to tell you, because you will be very cautious about the woods from this point forward. So my encounter with this creature is one of probably the scariest moments I've ever had in my life. Many years ago, as a teenager living out in the sticks, as we say in the southern US, I was out letting the dog use the bathroom when I heard crickets all around me chirping away into the night. Then they stopped, all of them in perfect unison. It got eerily quiet. Not even an owl hooted. Now, being in the country, you can't just stop the sounds of the forest. The forest is lively after dark. Then, somewhere deep inside me, I got a bad feeling that there was something unnatural lurking near our cabin. My senses told me whatever it was very tall and of pure evil. I glanced around to see where I thought it was, and I stopped and looked at a hill east of our house. And then the growling started. I wished to God I had been smarter and headed back inside the cabin, but the native in me was wondering what this thing was. I grew up in the Rockies for a few years as a kid, but I'm a southern kid at heart. In the mile-high forests are wolves, mountain lions, grizzly bears, and even rumors of Sasquatch people are all things I had heard. I have an ability called clairvoyance because of my ancestry like a medicine man. It has saved my life quite a few times. Now back to the story. The growl I heard was like a wolf's growl when it was about to snarl at you, only this thing had a much deeper growl. It was as though it was demonic in origin. My blood ran ice cold, dropping to about 80 degrees. I listened and could hear it walking around, and it snapped 3-inch thick saplings like twigs. That meant this thing was around 500 pounds or more, and probably quite tall if it's that weight, like Andre the Giant. The pauses in between steps confirmed my suspicions. When you're tall, it takes more effort to move your long legs when you walk or run. Then I listened closer to the walking rhythm and realized it walked on 2 legs, like a human. Then it stopped for a second or two, as if it knew I was around, but could sense that I wasn't like any other humans it had observed before. I had an ability that wasn't like other humans, so after pausing, it growled toward my direction, as if to say, "You don't scare me, you Native American man. I laugh at your abilities." Luckily for me, we had a few Bibles in the house we kept on hand. I could hear a pack of coyotes yipping as if they killed a deer, then this thing growled at them, and all the coyotes shut up. My dog growled a bit. I told her to stay quiet. We ran back into the cabin, locked the doors, and drew the curtains. I reached for a Bible as fast as I could and held it tight to my chest the rest of the night as I slept. When morning came, I had the dumb idea to go up where this beast was walking around and discovered a deer that had deep claw marks on its bones and was stripped clean down to the bone. The only thing left untouched was the head. All around me, those 3-inch thick trees were snapped in a path. I had never been up in these woods before, but it was like a horror movie that I was starring in. Not long after that, I discovered the creepiest trailer I have ever come across. It was sunk a bit into the ground, but had parts of it ripped open by something very sharp. A few months later, I checked on the trailer again, and it was on its side. Never went into the woods for 2 months after that. I did some research to find out what I had encountered as a child. My brain told me that it was a werewolf, something the French fur trappers of the 1600s called loup-garou. In English, that means dogman. From the encounters, one couple staying in their camper in a national park had one of them peek through their window and smile at them.